feel like if I was the volunteer, I'd be sweating. I would just be sweating. Thank you for joining everyone who has interviews coming up. Where are you at in your process? Are we still waiting? What's going on? Oh, some interviews very soon. Awesome. Cool. If you don't have an interview yet, don't be too alarmed. It is still fairly early in the cycle. There are still schools who have not even looked at an application yet. So don't fret. It is okay. Every school has a different process and timeline. So hang tight if your interview has not come yet. One of the more popular sayings in the pre-PA world in the past few years has been, it only takes one. So one interview, one school, one acceptance. That's all you need. So hang in there. Don't get too scared. You'll be okay. And hopefully, fingers crossed, get some interviews, get some acceptances, right? But lots of interviews. That's exciting. I'm Savannah. I am a dermatology PA in Georgia. I'm currently on maternity leave. I don't know how long you call them a newborn, but I have a 5-week-old. We're going to hope he doesn't make a surprise appearance. He's supposed to be sleeping. We'll see if I time this right. Dad is in charge, so we'll see. But I do the PA platform. I'm assuming that's how you found me. And I just love interviews. I love interview season. I really like the interview process. I feel like it gets a bad rap for being scary and stressful. It is, but it also can be kind of fun. And when you get to an interview, it's really exciting to meet people who may end up in your class and maybe your classmates and your colleagues. And so it's a lot of networking, but kind of an exciting time. You're all in it together, okay? So I'm excited for y'all to kind of hype each other up and for us to hear from our volunteers. We have 3 volunteers who hopefully should be raising their hands to come up soon. We will jump in whenever we have them ready. Hopefully no technical difficulties. Sometimes these can be a little funny when we start adding people to the session, but hopefully no issues. If we like these, maybe we'll do more this season. We have some older ones that you can watch on YouTube and from our old webinars, but these tend to be a lot of fun. And it's intimidating for our volunteers. So again, we want to be very grateful to them and encourage them in their interviews. So if you are anyone in the Baltimore area, like anywhere near Baltimore, I've never been to Baltimore, but I'm going there in October and I would love for you to join me. So I'm going to a pre-health conference, pre-med, pre-PA. I've been able to help out a lot with planning this conference and making sure that there are really great offerings for pre-PAs. So Friday night, we're going to do a little meet and greet mixer. And then Saturday is conference sessions all day. So it's called MappedCon. You can go to mappedcon.com and we'll put that in the chat. I would just love to meet some of y'all. And if you have pre-PA club or a group and you'd like to come, it would be so much fun. My code for $25 off registration is PA platform. And I think they have like early bird right now too. So it's discounted and then you get another discount. But we're doing admissions panels with PA admissions, practicing PA panels, and general sessions about personal statements and interviews and things. It's going to be really fun. If you've never been to an in-person conference, it's just a great place to network. And there's going to be PA programs there. There's going to be like 50 exhibitors for you to meet and greet, test prep people, lots of different opportunities, giveaways, fun stuff. So I think it'll be a really good time. And Sunday, they're doing a bunch of hands-on sessions. So I think you can get like CPR certified, do your BLS. They're having like suturing workshops. And then we're going to have a PA student panel as well. So lots of stuff. I would love for you to join. And it's October 6th through 8th. And most everything's on the 7th. It is an in-person conference. So like face-to-face. We're going to meet. It's so cool. As far as I know right now, there's no virtual option for this year. If you have been following for a while, in 2020, we were supposed to do an in-person conference in Atlanta, had it all planned, like good to go. And then it was supposed to be in March or April. that clearly didn't happen. We'll jump in. I think I see some hands raised. Let me see who's there. Okay, so it looks like 2 of our volunteers are here. Awesome. If you have your PA school interview guide, some of these questions may sound familiar. I'm going to mix them up a little bit. I don't put this on the website anymore, but it is on Amazon. So I just want to make sure you know that it's not on the website, but they're a lot quicker than me. I had somebody say they ordered it like at night and got it the next day. So my shipping was like 12 days. So if you want this, just get it on Amazon. And then we have our interview course as well. All right. So I think we're going to start. I saw your email, Josh. So we'll start with you. Joshua, I don't know what you go with. I tend to do nicknames. I'm going to bring you up and then we'll go from there. I actually have not seen Joshua's application. The next 2 volunteers, I have seen their applications. Hi, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining. Here, let me grab my notebook so I can take my notes. Well, I do know where everyone is interviewing. It's up to them whether they want to share or not. And we're trying to make this as realistic as possible. So you may already be aware, Joshua, and you can introduce yourself in a second, but your interview, typically they do group interviews where you're interviewing. So a few applicants with either one or a few different panel members. A lot of times at an interview, it's mostly faculty, but then a lot of schools will bring in community PAs too, or alumni to help out. So you never really know who may be the person interviewing you. You can definitely review the website ahead of time and get an idea and maybe some of those people, but then you may have some outsiders too that you don't recognize at that interview. How are you feeling being our first to go?
Feeling good.
Feeling good? Okay. Good. All right. Let's see. The volunteers for tonight are all pre-selected. They all emailed and volunteered ahead of time. So in a real mock interview, they're usually an hour long, and we usually spend about 20-25 minutes doing questions and then do feedback afterwards. Normally I type responses as I go, but I'm just going to take notes by hand so you won't hear me typing. So if I'm looking down, it's just because I'm taking notes.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. So let's just jump in. You feel ready?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay. So go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, my name is Joshua Ferguson. I grew up in Florida. I moved around a lot, but most of my childhood in Florida. I'm currently in Birmingham, Alabama. For the last 5 years, I've been a medical sign language interpreter. And more recently, I've been a patient care technician. But most of my time, I enjoy spending with my cat. Her name's Charlotte. She's a calico. Or I enjoy working out or reading or hiking. I love the mountains in the Southeast. So that's what I spend a majority of my time doing.
Okay. Why do you want to be a PA?
Yeah, I want to be a physician assistant because I think the career is amazing. I have had exposure to a variety of medical careers, and the PA careers just really stood out to me. I like the accelerated 2-year graduate degree. I like the idea of being able to have a certain level of autonomy while also working in collaboration with a physician. I like the fact that you can work in a variety of specialties. I think that the PA career just stands out to a lot of people. I mean, it's nationally ranked, I believe this year, second as the best healthcare careers. And so for me, it just stood out. And I really confirmed that desire and that guidance towards the PA career by shadowing a few PAs. I've shadowed a hand surgery PA and a family medicine PA, and really enjoyed what both of them do. Both that they do. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you think is a limitation on the PA career right now?
Yeah, I would say a limitation that the PA career has would be just a general lack of understanding within the patient population about what PAs do and what their responsibilities are. And even in the name, I mean, sometimes I've heard from PA friends that patients will confuse them for a medical assistant. And I think that, just creating more clarity about what the PAs do and that, they can write medication, can prescribe medication, they can work in surgery, they can be first assist, for example, and they could be a primary care provider. And so I think that clarifying the role of a PA within like the general population would be really helpful for breaking down barriers for healthcare for us in the US.
Okay. What volunteer experience has been your most meaningful?
Yeah, during my undergraduate work and then for a couple of years after, I've volunteered at the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind. And I had a really cool opportunity to connect and lead a small group of people, of students after school on Wednesdays. And we just had an opportunity to discuss the Bible as well as also to practice and improve in English skills and written in reading and writing in English as well. And yeah, that just really stood out to me from my experience. And I hope to translate that into PA school and providing medical care for people with, disabilities and providing services to the medically underserved as well.
Okay. Let's stop there and talk about some of these. I have questions just because I think your experience is super interesting. I'm going to ask the chat, how do y'all think Joshua's doing? Do we feel good? And you'll probably hear me talk about some things throughout all of these that are a little bit similar. But so I'm just interested. How did you get into sign language interpretation?
Yeah, so I have no deaf family members, and
Okay.
normally people get into interpreting because they have either a mother or father who's deaf. I took American Sign Language in high school through dual enrollment, and I just really fell in love with it. I took 1, 2, 3, and 4 of ASL by the time I had graduated high school, and I just knew that that was the path for me. My professor was a male, and he said, I don't want a female interpreter to look at me when I have to pull down my pants at the doctor's office. And so I was like, well, that's a little bit crude. I mean, I was like, wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I thought that there was a big need for that. So I decided to pursue interpreting.
That is so cool. If you have an opportunity to share that, I think you definitely should. A lot of people said you're doing great. Definitely unique experience, not a lot of filler words. I think your interview was very natural. Somebody says start every answer with yeah, which I tend to do that too. But I'm going to watch back and see if that's something you're doing. I didn't notice that, but
okay.
Maybe. But yeah, no, I just said it. Now I said it. Okay. That definitely caught my attention. That was unique, and I just thought that was really neat. So let's get back to the beginning. So first, just tell me about yourself. I think great introduction. You said your name, and that's something I always look for. Some people feel like they don't need to do that, or they feel like they know my name, but especially in a group setting, it's important to reiterate your name. Just continue to create that familiarity. You'll notice that sometimes at interviews, they ask you to send a headshot or bring a picture, or they'll take your picture while you're there. That's because when they go back to discuss you later, they're going to pull that picture up, and you want them to associate your name with that. So when you're introducing yourself to people, totally fine to reiterate your name. Okay. I liked that you did that. Gave you a little background on where you're from, a little background on your experience. You didn't really get into academics at all, really, which is fine. But I want to mention kind of any type of schooling and just throw that in there. I like that you added the personal stuff, talking about cat, hiking, exercising, reading, just some things that you like to do without getting into your YPA, because sometimes it's easy to ramble on into getting into that, but that's going to come up most of the time later. And especially in a group setting, I think your answers were a great length for a group setting.
Okay.
Usually I'm not having people cut their answers short or pay too much attention to timing. But when you're in a group setting, you do have to be a little cognizant. Like, you want to be respectful of the other people.
Yeah.
And so just getting to the point, being very direct, stopping when you're done is a little bit more important. But I thought all of your answers were inappropriately. That was great. Second question, just why PA? And so one thing I noticed in this question is this is when I felt like, and I talk about this being something I look for, is when do I feel like someone is being themselves and being just like genuine in an interview, which is different than confidence, because you can, and I think you came across as confident, but just actually being honest and yourself can be a little bit hard. Like, sometimes there's this wall there that people can't ever break through. So this question especially, I felt like you just were passionate about the career and you knew about it and were being very genuine in your response. You weren't just trying to tell me what I wanted to hear. You weren't just making it up. I felt that from this point forward. So you said physician assistant, which is great. We didn't say physician's assistant. We're still using physician assistant unless the program goes by physician associate. If the name stuff comes up, you can talk about knowing about the name change. But if the school hasn't changed over, you don't change over yet either. Let me see what else. You told me a little bit about it with the autonomy, different education, different specialties, standing out. One thing I felt like was maybe missing that could be a little bit more story-like would just be like how you found out about the profession.
Okay.
Because you kind of were like, yeah, it stood out to me, but I was kind of like, well, when did this decision happen? Was that in high school? Was that in college? Was that after college? Like, what? Give me a little bit of time context to just understand kind of where this all took place. I really liked that you had a good variety of shadowing experiences. So you had that specialty with the hand surgeon, and then you also had the family medicine kind of general stuff too, which I think shows just a very well-rounded understanding of the profession. Any questions so far? Do you have any thoughts so far on how you did? Or
I felt like my YPA was a little bit scattered, but
okay,
that's it.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention, I don't remember if it was that one. I think it was that one. If you feel like you're getting scattered, you can always just take a second and gather your thoughts. You said something and like kind of corrected your wording, but I knew what you meant. And so, like, you're a real person. We're all real people. We're going to say things differently. I know that I tend to talk fast, and I don't know. We all have those little kind of mannerisms and things we say. Don't get too focused on how you're saying things or the wording or anything like that. It's not going to make a difference in the long run. And if you get in your head about that, it can really throw you off. One thing that I like to recommend is pretend that you are talking to a patient. If a patient asks you questions, you're going to respond a little bit differently than if you feel like somebody intimidating is asking you questions, because we try to establish this rapport with patients. And you can do the same thing with your interviewer. The next one was, I think it was limitations of the PA profession. So the reason I did this one is because I think in a group setting, this is one that, like, your answer was probably the go-to answer for most everybody. So let's say somebody before you had already said that. Then what would your approach be if they said kind of the same, along the lines of the same thing?
Yeah, maybe I would take the approach of like clarifying what limitations they're referring to, because I mean, obviously, the PA role is limited, especially in the surgical setting. Where I'm not going to be being a neurosurgeon or a CV surgeon, but I'm happy to, and I would love to be a first assist, for example. So if it was talking about the limitation in terms of role, I think that, the role is not as expansive as the physician role. It is limited in that way. But I'm not sure. I guess that was a different spin on it.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. That's a different spin. And that is one thing I love about interviews and doing mock interviews is hearing how people put different spins on things. So yeah, so that still answers the question. That's still an appropriate response, and you could absolutely go that route. Another option would potentially be to expand on what someone else has said, which is totally fine. So you could say, I completely agree with what Joshua has said. And I also feel like the lack of understanding of patients in the general population is a big issue. And I've seen that, blah, blah, blah. Like go into, a time you were shadowing or working, or when you tell people you want to be a PA and they don't know what it is. So you can then build on that and pull from your personal experience in that setting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So that's just another way, like, especially in groups when it can be a little stressful, kind of, you're like, oh, don't take my answer. That's one way you can approach it, just to kind of also put another spin on it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then last question about volunteering, which super cool. Like, again, could tell you're super passionate about this. And that's one thing that I just really liked. I like that you didn't necessarily go to something medical or healthcare, which I think just backs up that like you actually care about this.
Yeah.
But not to say that people don't care about their medical volunteering, but I think sometimes in an interview, people can get very like laser focused on just talking about their patient care experience, and you don't have to do that. I would definitely try to talk about as many points on your application from all of your experiences, life in general, as much as you can, versus only focusing on one experience. So that was really cool. Yeah. And one thing I like, so you did relate that one back to PA school or being a PA really well. I think you could even take the approach of talking about how your experience would benefit your classmates. I would say that probably no one else in your class knows American Sign Language, and that would be like a huge thing for you to just be like, hey, like I want to help people understand, and kind of if that's something they're interested in, help them out, and that would be beneficial to your classmates and a lot of future patients. So just, thinking about that as something that you bring to the table. Like, what do I bring to the table that's different? That's definitely one of the things. So, yeah. All right. How are you feeling? That was just a few questions, but you did pretty well, which I've heard. So that interview, I think, is usually about 30 minutes. So 30 minutes with 3 applicants, you're not going to be asked that many questions.
Okay.
You do have to put yourself out there when you get those opportunities.
Okay.
Give them some good info, but I think you did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, keep us posted on how things go.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you for volunteering, being our first volunteer.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. How do we feel? I think you did fantastic, especially being our first volunteer of the season. Let me see if our other volunteers are ready. I feel like if I was the volunteer, I'd be sweating. I would just be sweating. So if you're new here, or you just joined us, so everybody volunteered ahead of time. They emailed me, and then I got their applications. I actually didn't see Joshua's, so his was like blinded. So got their applications. I knew where they are interviewing. Whenever we do mock interviews, we try to make them as personalized as possible with the information we have. We want to make sure you're highlighting the things that you should on your application. Okay, so this is going really well so far. Perfect. We have one more. How are we feeling? Good? Not good? I hope this is helpful and that y'all are enjoying this. I think this is fun. So next year, which hopefully if y'all have interviews, you won't need me next year, right? Next year, we're exploring some ways to do like group interviews and like group like cohort sessions that may depend on kind of like when you're interviewing and when you're applying and stuff. I don't know if that would be helpful. We've never really done group stuff before, but I feel like kind of like seeing you guys in the chat, like to have people that you would just go through this together with, like through this whole season would be helpful. So that's something we're kind of trying to figure out logistically, like what that would look like and how to do that. Julie is our last volunteer. We'll bring her up and see how she does. And I don't know if it's better or worse to go last. Like then you've already kind of like seen how other people do, but then maybe that's intimidating. I don't know. There are some more of these on YouTube. We upload everything there. So in last month, or I guess a while back, I don't know when, before I had my baby, we did a like interview tip webinar. So that's on YouTube. So if you're feeling like, I don't know what to do, I just need, general interview help, that's on YouTube. There's all kinds of stuff on our channel there. So, and if there's things that we need to like cover and talk about that we haven't done, like send me an email, send me a message, and we'll do that. So, hi, Julie.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Great.
Great. You have really cool experiences that I'm excited to hear about. So we'll get into all of that. Thank you for being our last volunteer of the night.
Happy to be here.
We'll jump in. Let's just start with, so your interviews, by the way, and you may already know this, seem fairly traditional in a little bit of everything, like individual interviews, group interviews, essay, just like normal stuff from what I know. They could always change it, but it doesn't seem too crazy from what I can tell. Tell us who you are and why you want to be a PA.
I'm Julie Lane, and I grew up in the Seattle area with my family. Every summer, all my cousins and I would get together at our summer house, and we had houses next door. So we grew up in this like really lovely setting, and so much of my family was in medicine. You might think that's where I get it, but they really encouraged me to pursue my own path. And so only in college, when I was getting training to be an adventure guide, did I discover my passion for medicine. I was training to be a guide, and you needed to be a wilderness first aid or a wilderness first. So I was like, let's just pick the most advanced option possible, and got my wilderness EMT. And in my course, I was like, wait, this is really rad. I like this. And went on to volunteer in Uganda to further pursue whether I liked that, and then got further involved in my college EMS club and found out I really liked that. But overall, I wanted some more time getting life experience. So the last 5 years, I've been in Boulder working in healthcare and guiding and just doing all my favorite things outside, like backpacking, ice climbing, hockey, and then all the fun indoor activities like hosting dinner parties and game nights.
Nice. What are you looking for in a PA program?
In a PA program, I like the small faculty to student ratio, and I want one that has a good amount of time that you can spend with the faculty. That comes from having a small ratio, and the better your professors are, the better your experience is going to be. So ideally, we can have a program with not a lot of turnover in their faculty. And I just want a lot of student resources, like for them to be there with you. Just because the PA program is small doesn't mean that the university has dedicated a lot of resources to it. So I want to make sure that it's encompassed like well in the university. So good resources, good faculty will really make an awesome experience, I believe.
How do you study?
I love to study by teaching. In the beginning part of the process, I'll make note cards and review the note cards. I don't really like highlighting. I've read that that's not a very effective way to study, and that teaching it is. And so I'll find some classmates that either need help or have more expertise than me in the area, and we'll teach each other back and forth.
What do you think is your biggest weakness?
My biggest weakness? Great question. Probably how social I am. This is great to have in class because I can really build cohesion in the classroom. but I have to remember to restrict my social activities so that I can prioritize school.
Tell me about a time that you had to resolve a conflict.
Oh, there's so many conflicts that come up in healthcare, especially when you have challenging patients. Let's pick a good one. A conflict. I had a less agreeable patient that was pretty frustrated that we needed to use a lift to move him. And I could tell that it was going to get heated or blow out of proportion. And so I used appropriate humor to rectify the situation. And as we were lifting him up in the big Hoyer lift, I said, prepare for takeoff, because I knew he was in the military and thought he might find that relatable or funny. And he did. And then as we lowered him into the chair, he said, the eagle has landed. And it just diffused it and prevented there from being a conflict like it seemed there would be, as well as adding some humility back to what is kind of a ungraceful way to be moved from the bed to the chair.
Okay, let's stop and talk about those. How are you feeling?
Great. I love interviews.
Me too. That's good. So yeah, I mean, you're super personable. And I can tell just being yourself, which again is what I love to see. And very, very much appreciate. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, love the story in there. Let's go back to the top and then we'll go from there. I started with just tell me about you and why you want to be a PA. That was where we started. So you said your name. Great. When you were talking about growing up at your summer house with your family and all that, I was like, this sounds like a book. So nice. It sounds so ideal. I've never been to Seattle, but it sounds nice. But yeah, so I thought that was, just very personable. Talking about your family and medicine, that's interesting. Gives me a little background, little context. And then I told you guys she had a really interesting experience, which I feel like we just got the very superficial part of. But being an adventure guide, going into wilderness EMT, volunteering, all of that, super cool. Definitely is the standout. Oh, that's interesting factor. And then talking about what you've been doing now. So that question did have a little bit of a second part because I did ask you talk about yourself and YPA. And so you didn't really get into the YPA too much. And so that's okay. They probably would have followed it up a little bit with tell me more about that or whatever. The 2-part questions I can get people because a lot of times you do get focused on that first part and then not as much on the second part. So just if you have those, try to relate both. Next one was, what are you looking for in a PA program? These are all great points. Somebody was saying the resources were a great point. Talking about the faculty to student ratio, very, very good and helpful to have. Not a lot of turnover, which is a big thing for accreditation. I don't know if you know that or if people know that, but programs that have a lot of faculty turnover are more likely to go on probation. So that is very important that they have faculty that have been there a long time and that they're very stable in that, because that can be an issue. One thing I was going to note is, depending on where you're interviewing, if you want to, you could review the faculty ahead of time. So you could look at the website, and if there's somebody specific who has a similar interest to something that you have an interest in, you could mention that. So you could say, I noticed that Professor Rebecca wrote, it works in emergency medicine, and I'm really excited to learn from her and all of her experience. She's done Army medicine, and that's really cool to me and something I would be interested in. So you can show that you've done your research on the program if that's relevant or makes sense for you. If you have talked to any students about the program, you can talk about what they've said. If you've gone to any info session, bring that up. Just showing that you've done your homework. Location is fine to mention too, especially if you have a connection to the location. If you're close there or have family there, whatever, that kind of gives you a reason for why you would go there versus I'm in Georgia. It'd be weird if I applied to a California school and didn't have a reason I wanted to go there. So you could bring that into if you wanted to. Next one was, how do you study? So great. Somebody said in the comments, very succinct, get to the point answers, which I appreciate. I think you could give a little bit of an example and relate it specifically to PA school just a little bit more. So one thing in interviews is you just never know how many questions they're going to ask you. So you could get in there and they ask you 3 questions and that's it. So you can't ever assume they're going to ask you something. You want to make sure that you're giving as much information as you can in each answer. For that one, you could say if there was a specific class that you struggled in or a semester or whatever that kind of taught you how you learn to study, that could be something that you bring up. So that question was asked, how do you study, which is a very direct way to ask that. And you answered that the way I asked it. For these questions that are asked very directly, if you can turn them around and change the phrasing to, like, if I asked you, tell me about a time you had to study to do well, your answer would probably be completely different than what I said when I said, how do you study? If you can make them into that phrasing where you're like thinking of an example of when you had to study to do well and had to figure it out, that'll give a little bit more context to the situation. Anytime they're asking about academics, studying, classes, the point is to see if you feel ready for PA school. Like if you know what you're getting into, if you're, ready to take that on. So if you can say like, I know I'm going to have to study very hard in PA school and study a lot, and this is going to be my focus, just state that so that it is there and you are showing awareness of what you're getting yourself into. As much as you can, be prepared ahead of time. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right, what was the next one? Biggest weakness. So when you said being social, it was funny because I was like, this could go either way. Like, are you too social or not social enough? And so then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I got it. But like being social, I don't think that's definitely not a bad thing. I think even in PA school, like you could use that as a positive. I get what you're saying. Like, yes, I've got to learn to say no, but also being able to say like, I feel like I'm going to be that person in our class who brings us together. And after test day on Friday is like, let's go get dinner, and is planning things. And maybe I'll be the social chair or event planner. We have our little officers or something. Maybe that's a role you take on and that's who you are in your class.
I'm the social chair at my hospital.
Okay, so there you go. That's not a bad thing. And so again, bring in those examples and be able to say, I remember a time in undergrad where I should have been studying, I overcommitted, and this is how it turned out. Since then, I've realized sometimes I have to say no, or I can only put this much time towards social activities. And I know in PA school it's going to be limited, but you do have a built-in kind of support system with your class. And it's important for everyone to take time away from school and to de-stress and everything. And that may be something that you're able to help with. So I liked that response. That was very unique. I don't think anyone's ever said that when I've asked that. I love interviews because everybody always has different responses, but that was definitely a new one for me with your approach, which I appreciated. And then dealing with conflicts, tell me about a time you had to resolve a conflict. This is one of those where it is completely up to interpretation. And this could go so many different ways. So talking about a patient, clearly, like we have lots of conflicts with patients, but even that can go different ways. Like you said, having a disgruntled, not happy patient versus also just having a time that you messed up or something got messed up with a patient. Like those are very different. Or another issue of conflicts, like it could be something in your personal life. It could be something with school. There's so many different ways to approach this. I think your example was very good. And again, showed your personality, which I appreciated. This would be one where if you feel like you've already been able to talk about your experience, you could bring up something from one of those other areas. Also, just depending on how the interview is going, could potentially use that to give a little context of what you do. And that's just going back to don't assume the interviewer has seen your application because they may not have. So they may not even really know what your role is. So you may just want to say like, hey, I work in the hospital doing XYZ, and that's how I had this patient and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to give too much background, but just that enough context. And that's what we see like in personal statements and essays too, is just you want to give just enough so they understand what's going on. Overall, great job. I think you'll do fantastic in your interviews. I really feel like tonight. All of you guys did a really good job just being yourselves, and that's not always the case in interviews. So I think you'll do a great job. How do you feel?
Oh, I felt good. I agree with everything that you said. Make sure to answer the whole question. It is nice to be succinct, but you want to make yourself look as good as you can with how little time you have.
It's so short, and it goes by super fast. It's weird because I like wrote about this in the book, and I talk about it. It feels like the longest time, but then the shortest time. Like while you're in it, it feels like it's never gonna end, and it's taking forever, and you're there for hours, and then afterwards you're like, that was it, it's over. What do I do? And you'll always feel like you should have done something different, or that you should have said something different, or you didn't say enough. Like it doesn't even matter. Like you always will feel like that. But that doesn't mean that you did a bad job or didn't, show enough of yourself. But again, I think you've got 2 interviews, you said, when you emailed me. So that's a huge accomplishment in today's application world. So I think you'll do great.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yes, thank you. Lots of positive comments in the chat there. All right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. This was great. Thanks, guys. Good luck on all of your interviews.